Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the IrBEA fifth webinar in our series this summer. We have essentially today we're looking at wood fuels and the production of wood fuels with a number of our suppliers and based around the country. So it's in line with the series so far. We've been looking at various options in bioenergy. We've looked at what the industry has been doing over the last number of years. We've had a webinar on district heating, on biofuels, so biodiesel and bioethanol, and we've also looked at the RED II directive and really looking at the sustainability criteria of wood fuels, because as we all know, we really have to ensure that any of the fuels we use going forward into the renewable sector are verifiable, renewable, and the EU, in fairness, have done some excellent work. So we have the RED II directive is the fruit of that work, which ensures that any of the biofuels that are used or the wood fuels that are used can be compliant, and we make sure that they're working on the right option. So today we're joined by two wood fuel suppliers in Ireland. We have John Sherlock of Sherlock's in Navan, and Kenny McCauley in Leitrim. He's also a firewood producer, but both also Kenny would predominantly supply wood chip, but also firewood, whereas John would be predominantly firewood, but would also supply wood chip. So both are certified under the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme and have many years' experience in supplying these fuels, and have established sizable businesses in that area. So along with approximately 30 other companies around the country, they're certified for their fuel quality, and the whole process is certified in terms of sustainability. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to speak to John Sherlock, and then we'll mainly with the firewood side of it, and then we'll speak to Kenny McCauley regarding the production of wood chip. So briefly about the Irish Bioenergy Association, some of you would have come across us before. Essentially, we're a representative body for all of the bioenergy sector on the island of Ireland. So we cover biomass, biogas, biofuels, and energy crops. The wood fuels obviously being part of the whole biomass sector. And we have a large membership there. We're mainly involved in representation of the industry, lobbying, advocacy, and running networking events such as this. Obviously, we're all curtailed at the moment to the screen, but we do hope to be able to start those again in time to come. But having said that, we found that the webinar is very useful over the last while, so we'll continue with them. So essentially, I'll pass you over first of all to I'll introduce you to John Sherlock, starting out, and we can listen to, we'll have a session with John, then Kenny McCauley, and then we'll have a question and answer section at the end. Now, if anybody wants to submit questions during the course of the talk, there is an option on screen. So if you want to have a look at that, you'll be able to see an option to the side or to the bottom of your screen where you can submit questions, and we will go through all those questions at the end. We've tended to have in these webinars approximately about an hour. Overall, we cut off at exactly 10:30, but we tend to do about half an hour presentations and then about a half an hour questions and answers. So with that, I'll pass you over to John Sherlock, and I'll put the slideshow for him as well here. So John, I think that's shared there now, and you're off mute there, so I think you can talk.
Yeah, that okay, Noel? You can hear me here now, can you? Yeah.
I can, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, welcome this morning. This is my first panelist on a webinar. I have been on a couple of Zoom meetings, but anyway, here we are now anyway. Just a brief outlay. We're based here in Navan, so I'm a forest owner initially and a firewood producer then. We started producing firewood here in 2013. Basically, we were looking for a product that we could make that was uniform in size and didn't go out of date. So in 2013, I got an email from Noel Galligan there from the Bioenergy Association that there was an opening display in McCauley's Wood Fuels. So I went down to McCauley's and met Kenny and his dad and Noel, and we joined the Bioenergy Association and we moved on from there. So that's just basically how we started. We produce firewood for both mostly domestic customers, but we do some for shops. We do about 80% for domestic users and about 20% for shops. We do about 1,500 cubic meters annually. And we employ 1 full-time person and 2 part-time people. You can see it, there's an overview of our premises there. So you can see the polytunnels that we use to finish off the drying of our firewood there. And we also, when we cut some timber, if it's a bit too fresh to go into the polytunnels, we put them outside there and double stack them and put a cover over them to get them down to about 25 to 27% is generally when we put them into the polytunnels to get them down the last couple of percentages of moisture. If you want to go to the next slide there now. Yeah, grand. So how do we go about it? Well, having been with the Irish Bioenergy Association, and we've done a number of training modules with them. We've been in different firewood producing places. We've been down over in Austria, which was very, very interesting at the start. So the one thing that we seemed to find was that you have to, for to produce firewood without using an artificial means of drying it, it's not difficult, but it takes time and it takes a little bit of working out. So what we tend to do is, at this stage now, we buy a year ahead before we actually process it. So our timber that we sell would be a minimum of a year bought. So that requires a good bit of ground space in which you have to stack your timber. And that in itself is a challenge, because you have to try and stack it in a windy, unsheltered location. And you really need wind rather than sunshine. If you have wind, and if you stack, as Kenny, I was looking at Kenny's presentation, and he'll go through it as well, you need plenty of wind, you need plenty of space. The other thing is, we're buying forestry tenants from local private woodland owners and from Quilcha. So in an ideal situation, your raw material would come in on an even flow as cordon as you wanted it to come in. But that doesn't happen in forestry, because it tends to be that there's a forestry operation going on within the radius in which we buy pulp, and they would ring up and say, well, we have 10 loads, we have 15 loads, we have 5 loads, can you take them? So you have to have the ability there to take in this timber when it really comes. And after a while, people get to know what your stock levels are and what sort of timber you want. And I suppose that in itself is a challenge too, because in the last 3 or 4 years, the forestry tenants tend to have gone down in smaller diameter, because a lot of it's been used for wood chip, that what Kenny does there, but that isn't suitable for firewood. We'd have, say, a minimum of 100 millimeters, which is roughly 4 inches minimum diameter is what we'd accept. And we wouldn't want a lot of that. So we have to do a little bit of finding and picking of our forestry tenants there. So if we want to go on to the next one there, no. Yeah. So when we have it stacked there on the roadside for about 6 months, we bring it back over to our processing shed, which is basically it's a shed that we used to buy woolen years ago. So it's quite a low cost operation as regards buildings and stuff like that. So when we bring it back to a processing shed, we chop it and split on a firewood processor. So it's a relatively automated process. Then we wrap it in drums. It falls into a drum and it's wrapped on top of a pallet for further drying. As we're cutting it, we pick off quality rings, which is basically without splitting the log. We could take the rings off, because they then go into a separate machine that makes kindling. Now, if there's a big knot in a ring, it blocks the kindling machine. So that's why there's a little bit of picking to be done before you can get a ring that's suitable for kindling. You can kindle them all when the timber is fresh, but what we found is the timber tends to go moldy. So what we do is we'd kindle as we cut the timber at about 25%. and then we put it into another dry-in shed we have, and that brings it down under the 20%. As I say, it's a constant monitoring of what you're doing. It's a constant monitoring of the timber that you're buying in, the timber that you're bringing over to process, and when it's processed, you're monitoring temperature or you're monitoring moisture when it's processed, so you know when to put it into the polytunnel. Then when you put it in the polytunnel and take it out, you have to monitor the moisture content before you sell it to your customers. So there's an element of finding what's best for yourself to produce this. As I say, it's not difficult, but it needs a level of thought and a level of monitoring on the whole time. If we want to go to the next one there, no. So when we sort of have a system the way we do it as well. So in the autumn and the winter, we cut the timber that we brought over and that's stacked for 6 months. Now it can be then, it doesn't matter if it gets some rain on the outside, because we're not selling it for immediate use. So what we do is we cut and we produce these. They're like a pallet, which is the firewood is wrapped on in a drum. So they can be double stacked. Now you can actually treble stack them, but I don't think it's that safe. So what we do is we cut them and then we bring them over and we put them in our polytunnels, which we would call as a solar kiln. So we double stack them in that. So that polytunnel you're looking at there is 30 foot wide. It's about 120 foot long, and it's about 12 foot high in the center. So we get a row of 10 across. So we get 6 on the bottom and 4 on the top, and we get 25 rows. So that's 250 pallets in that polytunnel. So it's a very cheap method of storing timber, but it also gets the moisture down. The only thing about it, as you look at that photograph, you'll see that we try and keep a slight, maybe 6-inch gap between each double stack of timber, so that from end to end, the air can circulate. So you tend to put your polytunnel with the end facing into the prevailing wind if you can. Now, that particular polytunnel, we didn't get to do that because we hadn't the space at the time. So we tend to store our softwood there. We have another one that faces directly into the prevailing wind, and we store our hardwood there because the hardwood is slightly more time-wise to dry. So if you can see it there on the left on that photograph there. So the hardwood takes longer to dry, and takes a little bit more energy. So we face it into the prevailing wind. But the funny thing is, when you walk past them polytunnels at any stage during the summer, you can actually smell the moisture coming out of the timber. Because we did a wind survey, and our average wind speed here is 8 kilometers an hour. So on nearly any day, you have 8 kilometers of wind just circulating through that. So it's taken out the moist air at both ends, so it is. So whichever way, and at the side we have the green netting. So the temperature there in the summer gets up. On an average day, it'll be about 26 to 30 degrees. So you get a reasonable, and we were able to get it out. Now, I took out timber there yesterday, and it was 17%, which to my mind is acceptable when you look at the fact that we haven't used any energy. The other thing, just while we're talking about it, and I don't know, how we actually got to where we are as regards being able to purchase the like of this. What we did in the first year, it was our first year doing it, we needed a big amount of stock. So to purchase that amount of stock on an overdraft is very expensive. So what we purchased it on was what's known as a stocking loan. So you go into your bank, you can borrow a certain amount of money, or your bank or financial institution, you can borrow a certain amount of money for a certain amount of time. So you can buy it for, say, we borrowed it for 6 months at the time. So for 6 months, to finance purchasing the firewood for each of them pallets at the time worked out at 90 cent a bag. So it was 90 cent for 1.7 cubic meters, which wasn't a huge amount. And then what you do is you You borrow the money when you purchase the raw material, and then you phase your payments back as you sell it. So you sell, if you borrow it, say, in January or February, and then you say, I'll pay it back September, October, November, December, January. Now, when I did that, I actually said it to a couple of other members who were running out of tight on finance to get the stock in, and they have used that, and it's an effective manner of doing it. Now, as time goes on, we'd all hope that we wouldn't have to do it, but it's a method of getting a stock in. So, if we want to go on to the next one there, no. Where are we? Oh, yeah. Our pallets. So when we're delivering our pallets, to ensure that the moisture content is as we say it is, and that it is under 25% or under 20%, we found that to go to every pallet with a moisture meter and start sticking it in was quite time consuming, and I considered it wasn't really accurate. So we did a study for a while, and we stripped down each pallet into the center, check the moisture on an oven test. That's one of the requirements of the WFQA. So when we decided that a certain species under 20% was a certain weight, so we built in a level of comfort for ourselves. So as we load the firewood onto our truck, what we do is we weigh every single pallet. So each species, we have a weight for each species below 20%. So when I weigh it, if it's above the certain weight that we have to keep it under 20%, we put it back into the polytunnel, because give it another 3 months or month or whatever, and it'll be at the right weight. Because when I'm saying it's not the right weight, it could be 15, 20, 30 kilos more than we would sell it out at. So if you put it back into a polytunnel, and at that time the polytunnel probably isn't as full as it would be normally, so the air circulating brings it back down. So that's the way we are able to guarantee that our firewood is under 20%. Now, we've moved from 25 to 20% because we were sort of achieving it, and then we just thought with a little bit more effort and thought we'd get it down there, because the difference in emissions and heat from 25 to 20% is very substantial. Now, if you look there, we're calling it kiln dried standard. Now, that's a term that one of our other WFQA members uses, and he gave us kind permission to use it. It's not available. I think there's a trademark on it. But so what that says is it's the same standard as kiln dried firewood, even though it's technically air dried, but it's done in what we would call a solar kiln. But as long as we are getting it below, the reason we have that statement is because now there's the alarm, sorry about that. The reason we have it at that, like that, is because most people, if you go to the next slide there now, most people, when you say it's not kiln dried, they don't understand exactly what you're saying, and it's not that and insulting them, that's just it. So if you look there, during the summer months, then we cut our pulp timber that we've dried over the forest road, and we bag it into small bags for sale in our yard, or we wholesale it into shops and fuel suppliers. So before you get now, and you can order 20,000 bags. You have to buy the plate initially on that your name and all that. So that's depending on how many colours, etc., that can be more expensive. But what we did was we bought it, the plate, we put down our kiln dried standard. We also bought our own little barcode at the back. So if you sell it into a shop there, you can see the barcode on the right hand side bag there. So if you sell it into a shop, you give the shop an empty bag. So that means they can run it through their system without having to tap in the product number. So when we have these bagged, we put them into a covered log warehouse, because you can't put them in the daylight because it degrades the red bag. So that's a challenge in itself. So what we found was we have a big warehouse. We've one end has a vented door, we've a vented roof, and we've a huge big 2-meter fan at the far end that's driven by a 3/4 horsepower motor. And it circulates the air there on a dry day. So again, you have air moving through, because we found if we don't keep it circulated, it might go musty, or just to keep it fresh, the air fresh. And again, during the summer, then you have warm air coming through that helps the drying process. So if we want to go to the next slide there now, whenever you're ready. Sustainability. This is the question people ask us the whole time. And I suppose this is one of the pillars of the WFQA. So when you're a member of the WFQA, which is the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme, when you get delivery of pulpwood, you must have a proof of origin, which is a felon license number. And if you have a felon license number, well, then it can be referred back to at any stage. And each load as it comes in must have its own delivery docket, which will tell the person it came from and hopefully the weight. Sometimes we buy pulpwood by weight, or we buy it by volume. Now, personally, I prefer to buy it by volume, because timber mightn't be, the general rule is that a ton of softwood pulp is a cubic meter, but sometimes depending on weight, it can be 1.3 cubic meters to a ton, or it can be 0.9, so it depends. So I like to try and buy it on volume. So as I was saying earlier there, we kiln dry standard by using the solar drying. But just, if we go on to the next bit there now, the next slide there, whenever you're ready, you know.
I call on time there, if you can just.
All right, how we doing now? How we doing now? On our processing equipment there, it's processed by 100% renewable energy. So in other words, our processor is driven by electricity, all our fans are driven by electricity. So we decided, let's try and follow our mantra. So we sourced an electricity provider that generates all their power by renewable electricity. So that's a cert we got from them. Now, I suppose it's more of an advertising for us than what it is. It is what we do. How are we doing a time there, Ev? Sorry. All right. Anyway, I'll finish up if we just want to do that there, Noel, on the WFQA. So the scheme was created by IrBEA as a quality mark. There's no other, what I would call, commonly recognisable standard available in Ireland. And people now, by buying with the WFQA, can purchase their firewood confident that it's dry and suitable for stoves. Thanks very much. I may have ran on a little bit, but this is the first time I did it, so you'll have to bear with me. Thanks very much, Noel.
That's no problem at all, John. That was perfect. Thanks very much for that. A couple of quick questions there for you. You're a while in the business at this stage, or this is something. What would have attracted you into it, or why would you originally got involved in this area?
Because we had forestry. We had some forestry, and we were looking to see could we generate an added income from our forestry tenants. Okay. That was the main driving thing, and it fitted in because it's a farm forestry based, and it didn't need a huge capital input.
Yes, gotcha. Okay. Thanks very much. We'll have a question and answer session later on, so we'll have a few questions on that. Okay. And I'll get Kenny McCauley, if he can, he's on mute there at the minute, and if he can come in and share a presentation as well. Okay, you're on mute there still.
Yeah. You know, hi everyone.
Okay, now your video's off, but it might be preferred that. Oh no, you're up now. That's okay. With signal. Okay. sorry, Kenny operates along with his father operates a wood chip service in Leitrim. They've been operating several years now, so we'll let him just introduce the company and what they do. And they predominantly would be specialising in the production of wood chip for industrial use, and it's a very good setup. It's something that they've developed over many years, and they have established themselves now as quite a substantial provider in the northwest. So Ken, I'll hand over to you there.
Very much, Rod. I hope everyone is able to see a couple of slides as are coming up and my internet doesn't drop out this morning. As Noel mentioned there, we're based in Mohill in County Leitrim. We produce WFQA certified wood fuels for the northwest and Midlands of Ireland primarily. There are a number of suppliers certified under the WFQA scheme dotted across the country, along with ourselves. There'll be good coverage across the whole country for WFQA firewood, wood chip, wood pellets or wood briquettes. We started off in 2007 diversifying from a landscaping business into a firewood business. And from there we moved more into wood chip, and in 2009 started producing dried wood chip for biomass boiler market. And 10 years after that, 2019, we had increased our output up to 10,000 tonnes per annum, and currently we have a capacity of about 40,000 tonnes per annum. So I suppose, like many wood fuel suppliers, including John, we'd be sourcing raw material from the region we're located in, obviously to keep transport costs down. Biomass is very much a regional and local level operation, because of the nature of the product. It's expensive to transport. So like while John will be sourcing material in the Trim and Navan and General Mead area, we'll be sourcing material in the northwest. And the source of the raw material we use, there's often confusion as to the assortment of forest material that is used for biomass processing, for firewood or wood chip. We really only use pulpwood, which would be the lowest grade of forest logs. The main driver for forestry at the end of the day is saw log material that goes to the sawmills for producing construction grade timber. Then you would have pallet wood assortments and stake wood. However, we would for firewood and wood chip, like many of the other processors in the country, we would really be just seeking the pulpwood assortment. Just to give a slight more indication of what it is, it really is either the top section of the trees, where the timber will be gone too small in diameter to produce saw log or sawn timber for construction, or would have a defect, would have a twist, or be forked, or have some other means that would deem it unsuitable for producing saw log for the construction timber. Ultimately, that's the main driver of forestry, and that's why a forest owner would, or someone would really get into forestry, would be they're seeking an end market, and the best end market is for saw log. Nobody really would be growing trees to produce pulpwood. It wouldn't be as commercially viable. So we're taking effectively the scraps of the forestry industry. Again, not only in terms of pulp, but we would also be unlimited in other assortments that could be used, or other sources. For biomass processing, we will be unlimited in species generally, whether it be softwood, hardwood, or various species within that. We'd also process brash, like many other biomass processors in the country. Some would specialise more in brash, others will be more specialised in logs. We'd often come across slab wood from smaller sawmills. So it kind of closes the loop in a lot of in the forest industry in one sense. And biomass processing, it's while it may not be a driver of the forest industry, it's certainly part of a healthy forest cycle. But in addition to that, it must also be noted what each assortment or raw material source will ultimately drive a slightly different product at the end. So in terms of wood chip, we would find that obviously nice clean pulpwood or clean logs will produce a nice clean end product, a nice clean wood chip. Whole tree we would typically see would be slightly lower grade, and then brash would be lower grade again. So it's important to note which customer you're going to can handle the material derived from each raw material stream. And when we purchase material at forest roadside of forest contractors or forest companies or private forest owners, the local haulier then will collect the material at roadside in the forest, transport it back to our yard where the logs are offloaded in designated stacks. And that's part of where our management starts coming in, management in terms of our own operation, but management in terms of the WFQA and how we monitor and control the various stocks within our yard and which material is going to which customer or is earmarked for which customer, and depending on what their needs are in terms of moisture content primarily. So that when the trucks offload into large stacks, this is our opportunity to dry the material from freshly cut moisture content of 50 to 60%, depending on the time of year. We look to dry it down, depending on the user, but we can dry it down to about 20% moisture. We're just using natural ventilation over a period of 6 to 18 months, depending on the customer again, their needs, but also depending on our the constraints of our own storage yard. Certainly, obviously over the years you'll find that certain areas of our location will perform better in terms of drying than other areas, and so depending on which customer you're going to, or which end product, which moisture, I suppose, range you want to be achieving, you would place material in a certain location within our yard. And as John would have pointed out today also, placing his hardwood in one polytunnel and his softwood in another to maximise the effectiveness depending on the wind direction. And it will be the same story for many other suppliers across the country also. I suppose over time you gradually find not so much tricks of the trade, but they're probably a little bit more obvious than tricks of the trade. But when we started out, we would have been keen to be jamming in as much material as possible to try and carry as much stock as possible, but you quickly find that cramming it in and not allowing for sufficient ventilation leads to issues in terms of quality and of the end product. And it's every day is a learning day. We're constantly trying to improve, based on last year's experience. And the difficult part of the difficulty with forestry and with biomass as well, it's long cycles. It's not, you might learn something today, but you mightn't be able to implement it for 12 months. So it can be difficult to progress and to move, I suppose, update it and develop things. But it's a slow burner. And some of the impacts we would see, if say in the past where we would have tightly stacked material, and I'm sure other processors would see something similar, where would be poor ventilation. After bringing the material in 6 or 12 or 18 months later, you'll find that much of the material hasn't dried. It ends up in half rotten and turning black and moss growing on it, and it doesn't lead to a good end product for some users. So some wood chip customers or biomass customers will be capable of handling it, but others won't. And it was part of the the bits of knowledge you pick up over time as to what material can go to which user, and depending on how you've managed it from the day it came into your yard. So from the stacks, the material is chipped. It can be chipped. We chip either into trailers or onto concrete pads or into sheds or as and when required, as demand, deems it necessary. We can also chip on site in the forest, as many other chip processors in the country would be also capable of doing. But again, it's dependent on the end user. A lot of it is dictated by them. If they're capable of taking the product in a fresher state, typically a fresher state depends on the arrangements that are in place with the forest owner, if the material can be left on site and allowed to dry. But in general, our experience would be that time would be shorter than we could achieve in our own yard. So if we were chipping in the forest, we would generally be delivering a higher moisture content material to a larger or industrial scale user. And then for storage at our own place, very quickly you would find out only suitably dry material can be stored without losses. What happens is if you've material above 30 to 35% moisture, depending on other parameters, probably such as bark content, or if there was needles in the material, heating would occur. So the material self heats as it begins to degrade. If it is sufficiently wet and if it's allowed to sufficiently heat, the material will eventually start to decompose and go a darker colour and go black. So if we were storing higher moisture content material, we would typically have a shorter storage period if we had to, if we were intending to store material or if we aren't offloading or aren't delivering higher moisture material, we'll hold off until a last minute or kind of a just-in-time type process for chipping it. And if we are storing material, we tend to only store drier material below 30% moisture to avoid the self-heating. Material or wood chip would typically be then loaded from the stockpiles into the trailers, delivery trailers. Trailers can vary depending on the wood fuel supplier, but also depending on the individual customers' needs, the site constraints. Some sites, some boiler sites won't be capable of taking a walking floor trailer. Some of the smaller sites, they may not have the storage capacity to take, say, a walking floor trailer. Whereas other sites, if they're further away, in order to keep it economically viable, we may have to look at a walking floor to justify the transport cost by bringing a larger volume. So it's quite case specific, and for our end users, again, like the source of the raw material, because it's at the end of the day it comes down to the economics of it also. The end users would be in the northwest region, to keep it within a reasonable transport distance and a reasonable transport cost, because again, the nature of the material, it's a low value product, so if there's excess transport on it, it leaves it quite expensive. The typical users range from small hotels, care centres, to large process heating industrial users. For example, the picture there is a large 30 megawatt boiler in the northwest, and it would be, you would have boilers right down to 100 or 150 kilowatt in nursing home environments. A typical example, here's an agricultural site, a recent poultry site with a 300 kilowatt boiler. With fuel savings alone, they're almost 10,000 euro saving over oil per annum. This example its application is currently going through for the SSRH, and we'll be expecting to have significant savings or an income from the SSRH on top of the fuel savings. But I suppose in general, in the bigger picture, you know, those are the carrots, but the real driver is the environmental aspects and the CO2 savings. From that one site alone, they're looking at, or they're estimating at saving over 120 tons of CO2 per annum. And as part of the WFQA, which ourselves and John and there are a number of other suppliers across the country, you know, I suppose as a group we've seen it from my perspective, and I believe a number of the other suppliers would think along the same lines. It's, you know, we need a form of standardisation, and this is it's an industry-led working group that has developed a form of standardisation to operate within the island of Ireland. I suppose for us, for myself, I'd say particularly important for the smaller to medium scale users, really in terms of wood chip. Not so much maybe the larger industrial scale users who would really adhere to alternative certification schemes, and they may not have similar concerns, or they may have more control over certain environmental aspects given the scale of their own installation. But for, say, the example there of the poultry farm, they would have smaller scale emissions abatement technology as part of their kit. So it's much more important for them to have a standardized product, a product that they know is going to be consistent, and it's not going to be exceeding certain moisture levels, which in turn would impact the emissions from the emission source, and the air quality from in the region resulting from that installation. So I would say it's very important particularly for the small to medium scale users to be looking for the WFQA mark or a WFQA supplier, regardless of where they are in the country. And the scheme, it's tied in, or it's governed by the ISO 17225 standard, the European standard, and as that is updated, the WFQA will follow, and you know, it's an ongoing development, and you know, as things change, we will be kept up to date. We're independently audited, and a major part of the scheme is the in-house testing and records management, which will then be audited annually. And the three main
sorry, just on time there, Ken, just if we can close on time there. Thank you.
Yeah, just wrapping up now. The three main areas of the WFQA that I would see, has been, I suppose, the three pillars of it: the sustainability aspect of it, the moisture content testing, and the particle sizing. With the sustainability aspect of it, it governs a strict chain of custody, documentation, as John mentioned earlier, the felling license numbers and the delivery dockets for each delivery. And it also, not only on the incoming material but also on the outgoing material, we would have our own chain of custody and tracking system in paper trail in place for managing that material. The second aspect, and a very important aspect, is the moisture content, as the moisture content is directly related to the energy content. So as the moisture decreases, the energy content increases. So it ultimately determines the value of the product for the end user. And as I mentioned, it's also a critical aspect of the emissions. So in many installations, if you were putting too high material that was too high in moisture for that given installation, it would lead to excess emissions. Particle sizing, again, we would see it as quite an important part of the WFQA for ourselves. Obviously, reliable boiler operation, you know, is paramount to the particle sizing. Oversized particles will lead to increased risk of jamming fuel augers. So for reliable operation, it's very important to have consistent particle sizing. And those are the sustainability and the chain of custody tracking is in-house paperwork and documentation that, you know, is part and parcel of it. And the other two aspects being moisture content and particle size, and the testing that we carry out in-house. It's varied depending on which product, whether it's wood chip, pellets, or or firewood or briquettes, and the testing procedure will be slightly different. For us, it's taking a representative sample and taking a wet weight, placing it in an oven, then taking a dry weight, and the resulting moisture, or the weight loss, will give us our moisture content. The particle sizing is also carried out in-house by our own, I suppose, DIY process. This is then double checked and audited and verified that we're in line with where we need to be with the annual audit. And just to highlight, as I mentioned, that the moisture content relative to the energy content, as the moisture content decreases, the energy value increases. And just to tie it up, and I think for many of the suppliers in the WFQA, a big part of the driver is you're trying to deliver a product that's displacing carbon intensive material, a fossil fuel, oil or gas. There's certainly no silver bullet in terms of renewables, but biomass and solid biomass has a large role to play. It's very versatile. Typically per week during the heating season, we'd be producing enough material to displace 150,000 litres of oil per week. But when we break that down in terms of carbon displacement, obviously there's plenty of people will have an input on how the green credentials of biomass, and there's discussions over RED 2, and there's plenty of bad press globally, but on a local level, which ultimately this is, it's a local operation, and it's for each individual supplier, it's going to be largely a local operation. Looking at it in per load or per truckload, we'd have an input of about 25 litres of diesel to process that, whereas what we get out of that, we get a product out of that it's sufficient to displace 10,000 litres of oil. So that's a big driver for us. So thanks very much for your time. Look forward to your questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Kenny. John, I might just get you to go off mute there as well, so we can start a discussion on it. Ken, just a couple of questions there directly to yourself. You have an interesting setup there, set up over the last number of years. Would you see where would you see the main developments coming in the next couple of years in terms of chip consumers?
Ourselves, the SSRH has obviously been big news in the biomass industry, or in the wood chip industry in the last number of years. In Ireland, in the Republic, it's been long awaited, and while the scheme is effectively, I suppose, implemented, or the ball is rolling on it, there has been slowness in getting some things off the line, and obviously COVID will have impacted that. We would have hoped, maybe even at the tail end of last year and early this year, that things would be a little bit further along with it. And look, over time it probably will pick up, but I'd say that I'd expect going forward that it'll be a growth area, but in the scheme of the bigger picture, it's still a drop in the ocean in terms of when you factor in the scale of SSRH scale boilers compared to a larger industrial scale, it's smaller volumes.
Okay, we have a number of questions in there. We're running close on time, so I'll just run through them fairly quickly. First one there, John, it would be for yourself. Essentially, in terms of using the tunnel, would a fan be of assistance in those tunnels, perhaps solar powered?
Yeah, we looked at it, and it's something we may be considering doing. The only thing about it is, if you put a fan through it, you tend to lower the temperature. The air wouldn't get to rise to the temperature in the tunnel, so you wouldn't get that temperature rise that helps the drying process. So it's a balance of air displacement to temperature. So yeah, if you hadn't the right location for the polytunnel, a fan, you'd probably want a fan running on solar switched to a temperature gauge and a moisture in the tunnel. Yeah,
so it could replace it. Okay. Do you have any advice for consumers who would buy in bulk to maintain stored wood at a low moisture content? I suppose with the inclement weather we tend to have, what would there be advice? This would again be more for the firewood side of it. Would there be advice on what a customer could do for storage? I'm assuming coverage is really what we're looking at there, is it?
Yeah, well, you can you can get a log store that basically covers the rain from coming from above. You put it somewhere where the prevailing wind isn't blowing rain in on top of it. You cover it from above. You tend to leave the sides open as much as you can. You don't put firewood in an enclosed space. It needs to breathe like any timber.
Gotcha. There's a couple of questions there in terms of pulp supply, issues with felling licenses. Actually, a couple of questions on that. Would John or Ken, where do you see that? I know there has been difficulties. Would you explain that, or where do you see that material situation changing?
Yeah, there's a challenge for us at the moment as regards supply for biomass, and it's going to probably get worse. It's the same as regards sawlog. There's an issue with felling licenses. We have a backlog of 1,500 felling licenses due in because of an appeal system that probably was opened with the best will in the world, but through other vested interests the system of appeals has been abused. I think that moving forward, if we want this whole felling license system issue to be resolved, we need a little bit of coming together from those people who have concerns on the environmental aspects of harvesting, planting, etc. And they'll have to match up to the needs of the forest industry in general. And I think we'll have to put a bit of resources towards resolving that issue fairly sharpish. Everybody has a voice and everybody has a right to that. But at the same time, if it's going to jeopardize jobs and the future of our forest, sawmill and bioenergy industry for the sake of spurious objections, which only 10% have been upheld, that's abusing the right of a person to object to a project going ahead. Kenny, what do you?
I just add to that, Sean, I'd agree entirely with everything you said there. I think in general that I suppose there is peaks and troughs obviously in the timber supply, and this is certainly it's a lower point in the supply chain, and it's, I think, evident that the system has certainly been abused. From our perspective, and ourselves, the supply, I wouldn't be overly concerned immediately. When I say immediately, I'm thinking, I suppose, in terms of the next heating season. For the smaller scale, say SSRH scale boilers or WFQA. Okay, but it's certainly it's not looking good for next couple of months.
And is it causing any difficulties further down the line? I know we're a long way from planting to harvest, but do you see it causing any issues in terms of afforestation? We've very high afforestation targets to meet, both for carbon capture reasons and for ecology reasons. Do you see the current issue having an impact on that, or is that something that's more, is there a lot of distance between the two?
Well, there seems to be what would I call an anti-Sitka spruce agenda and public perception that it's a dead zone for any form of wildlife, etc. Now, that's not strictly true. But if you look at the planning requirements of all forests now, they need to plant 15% minimum broadleaves anyway. So if you look at a site now, sites are being more carefully chosen. There obviously was mistakes made in the past in choosing specific sites, but sites are been better assessed in both soil suitability and area. And it has impacted on the planning because there's been a lot of objections to planning by people who would probably, and it's not insulting people, but some uninformed people who would have viewed certain species as the as a dead zone, and it's not true. So there's room there for everybody. But the grant system, if people want broadleaves to be planted instead of softwood, then the grant system will have to be reviewed, because in its present state, growing broadleaves loses money for the forest owner. It doesn't make money. It's a loss-making agenda from day one.
Yeah. Okay. Now another question there is, can you tell me your methods and frequency for testing of moisture content to maintain a consistent quality of the product? Now, John, you went into a little bit of that in terms of use the weight of the pallets. Can you either both of your own methods, I suppose, in the wood chip would be, each is horses for horses really in terms of different products requiring different techniques. But briefly, would you like to outline the methods on that? I suppose the question again was the frequency that you would look at moisture testing.
Kenny, do you want to take that there?
Yeah. Well, for like the dry material, it would either be per load or per batch, and per batch would really only be maybe every 2 or 3 load. So yeah, really we'd be taking a representative sample per batch. So it'll be from 1 to 3 loads that representative batch will cover. We'd be doing it typically on the dry stuff maybe once to twice a week, depending on the time of year.
Okay, John, briefly, do you want to add that or no?
No, I'm happy enough with what he said.
Okay,
yeah.
Right. Now, other questions there. Is there a growing demand for certified wood products in the residential sector? Would you see much volume going that direction? Is there in terms of residential demand?
Well, from our point of view, we were just looking at our figures from last year. We had sales increase of 28% overall on firewood, wood pellets, and other fuels, other biomass fuels. But I think if you market the product and market it with the WFQA standard, and I see the whole branding of WFQA moving forward. We're doing that as WFQA members. We've joined together, some of us, to do a standardised bagging label, which will help consumers when they go and buy. Kenny, what's your thoughts on that there?
Really, John. In general, yeah, it is growing.
Ken, it's hard to hear you there for some reason.
I'd say in general, I'd agree with you, John. In general, we would see that is growing, particularly with the WFQA, that there is increased interest with it. But on the firewood and on the chip, albeit slow, it's gradually growing.
Okay. And it's interesting the comment there, John, in terms of the quality side of it, because we would see in terms of quality, in terms of air emissions, and efficiency for the consumer is a big question. There's one question here which is quite related to that. It's coming a question for IrBEA. Stoves and stove installation is like a lottery in terms of quality and installation. Is there any organisation doing research and guidelines on these issues? What training is involved in installers getting heat test registered? Now there is a training course available in Ireland, and also let John and Ken comment on this as well, just from our own perspective. There's also the eco design standard, which we are hoping to do a webinar on very soon, where we will look at the different options for the homeowner in terms of stoves and whole central heating system boilers. And the eco design is very much geared towards proper efficiency. Like we're going to see stoves moving, or they have moved through the eco design through almost like you have a petrol and a diesel engine. They're two completely different fuels in terms of your wood fuel and then your coal replacement products. You're not going to be able to get a multi-fuel stove in Europe very shortly. It will be a wood burning stove, or it will be another type product stove, and you will find that your wood burning stove will not burn anything else in it, and you will find efficiently, and you'll find that your other type of stove will not burn wood very efficiently. So there is, and those standards are really there to reduce air emissions and to increase the efficiency. And in fairness, the stoves have come on in design. The eco design stoves are really streets ahead of where the multi-fuel stoves are. So we are going to see a dramatic change on that, and the homeowner will benefit hugely from that. But John, have you any comment on that, or Ken?
Yeah, I suppose, Noel, the fact there that most stoves now moving forward are going to be eco-design. An eco-design stove really isn't efficient unless you're burning timber under 20%. And I suppose that was one of the outcomes we had at a WFQA, a fire producer meeting, was that we were going to hold these training seminars to try and get fire producers to get down to the 20% moisture standard below as soon as possible. So what we were looking at was within the next year, get it down to 25%, then the following year get down to 20%. We decided, since we were buying our bags and we had it down to that standard, that's what we were going for, and that's why we readjusted our testing and our certification down to 20%, because the particle emissions at 20% are vastly different between 25 and 30.
Okay. We're just out of time. I just wanted, there was one last question I wanted to address, and that is, will WFQA require timber to come from a certified forest, FSC or PFC? Now, I know, John, you could speak on that as well. The requirements under WFQA are that it comes from a felling licensed source. We find that is it's a very robust system. FSC and PFC is very useful for material coming in from other countries, but they're not, I don't know, John, if you want to comment in terms of the private growers, it's difficult for them to be certified to those standards. Whereas the felling licensing system fits all of Europe. Like the RED 2 criteria in terms of certifying sustainability is going to be surpass FSC and PFC. And the WFQA will be aligning with the RED 2 directive. So sorry, John, if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, I suppose the one thing is, there's, as private forest owner, 12 of us in a pilot scheme got certified. There's a significant cost, and it's not going to suit everybody. And I don't think that going a certified route for purchasing pulpwood, which is essentially going to be used as a biomass, is the way forward. I think we have such a robust system in Ireland with felling licenses, and as we say, it's even going to get more robust. We have the environmental constraints, so I think the focus should be on producing a quality product now that we can be assured that it's coming from a sustainable source.
We're just completely out of time there, so just thanks very much to Kenny and John for joining us today. It's been a very informative session, and thanks everyone for joining us for the day, or for the hour there. And just to let you know, we'll have a series of further webinars coming up. We're going to be looking at biochar production. We will also, in the coming weeks, we'll be looking at the installation, as I said already, the types of domestic appliances that can be used in terms of eco-design, in terms of stoves and boilers. We will also be looking at industrial systems on another webinar. And we will be looking at biogas, the small-scale biogas for farms, larger-scale biogas for industrial systems. And we have a whole other series coming up in the coming months. So we look forward to seeing you all for that. So again, thanks very much to Ken and to John for the.
Thank you.